That is blood. Remember that. Animals.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Friedland. I'm president of the Berkeley City Club. I want to welcome you.
Ask them.
Can you please mute your machines? Thank you. I'm Tom Friedland. I'm president of the Berkeley City Club. I want to welcome club members and non-club members who are here this evening. If you're a club member, I don't think you need a lot of my comments, but if you're not a club member, I'd like to encourage you to become a club member. We are a block from campus. If you don't know where the Berkeley City Club is, we have one of the better restaurants in Berkeley. It's open to the public Wednesday through Saturday for dinner, Wednesday outdoors, Thursday, Friday, Saturday indoors, and for lunches Tuesday through Saturday, and for curbside pickup also. You can just get takeout from our terrific chef. And if you have guests from out of town coming, I encourage you to ask them to stay at the Berkeley City Club Hotel. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to my wife, Sandy, who runs our arts and culture program.
Hi, everybody. We have a very special program tonight. We're excited. When he was first elected in 2016, the 32-year-old Jesse Arreguín became the second youngest mayor in Berkeley's history. In case you want to study for the quiz, that distinction belongs to a one-term Berkeley mayor, Charles Haywood, who was about 2 months younger than Jesse when elected in 1913. Jesse is also Berkeley's first Hispanic mayor. His candidacy won endorsements from no less than Bernie Sanders, along with the Alameda County Democratic Party, the Sierra Club, the Alameda Labor Council, and civil rights icon Dolores Huerta. He won with 51% of the vote after 6 rounds of ranked choice voting. I should add that Jesse was re-elected last year with 65% of the vote. Overshadowing his first narrow and rather unexpected victory, however, was the outcome of the presidential election. With a nod toward that sea change in Washington, Jesse declared in his inaugural address, "Now more than ever, Berkeley needs to lead." And lead the city he has, quickly establishing his progressive credentials. Among Jesse's accomplishments, he opposed what he called Trump's hateful and harmful immigration policies, vowing that Berkeley would continue to be a sanctuary city. He pushed to make Berkeley one of the first cities in America to divest from companies involved in constructing the border wall with Mexico. He co-sponsored a resolution, as we can only do in Berkeley, calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump. He also co-sponsored the resolution to divest the city of Berkeley from Wells Fargo Bank in response to allegations that the bank had opened fraudulent deposit accounts and that it was financing private prisons and the Dakota Access Pipeline. He led the overhaul of the city's policing policies. So among other changes, police officers will no longer conduct traffic stops for minor violations. And perhaps most telling, and I don't mean to make light of this, he's gotten death threats from right-wing extremists. Facing COVID, however, has been one of the most challenging issues of his tenure. Over the course of the pandemic, Jesse hosted 30 town hall meetings, along with the city administrator and the city health officer, to keep all of us informed of the case counts, hospitalizations, death rates, and what the city and county were doing to keep us safe. But it's not as if Jesse has overlooked the other pressing needs of the city, particularly housing, which has long been one of his priorities. During his tenure, he has worked to change Berkeley's approach to addressing homelessness, focusing on compassionate solutions and housing. He's tried to increase new housing, to further tenant protections, to expand anti-displacement programs, and to create a funding stream for affordable housing. Town gown issues have been another of his priorities. When UC announced that it would add another 11,000 students, the city sued the university, asserting that it had failed to adequately study and mitigate the impacts of this significant increase. Jesse will tell us more tonight about the outcome of that 2-year court fight and the resulting agreement that the city struck with the university. Clearly, Jesse's been able to thread his way through the potential minefield that Berkeley politics can be. But he also sees beyond our borders to issues affecting the entire area. He currently is the president of the Association of Bay Area Governments, our regional planning agency. Many of his colleagues, both in Berkeley and beyond, attribute his successes to Jesse's interpersonal skills. As one of his aides put it to me today, Jesse has the ability to bring people of opposing views together and to build a consensus without compromising his own values. That's an incredibly important trait, especially during these times of growing polarization and partisanship. Vice Mayor Lori Drosta agrees. She says, working with Jesse has been a real pleasure. He's a respectful and civil colleague who is always trying to reach broad consensus. Councilwoman Susan Wengraf emphasizes that the mayor is wise and insightful beyond his years. She says, despite the 40 years that divide us, we have forged a very respectful and mutually supportive relationship. I very much enjoy working with him and learning from him. I appreciate his empathy for others and his insistence that he represents all of the city, not just the vocal minority. And finally, Councilwoman Kate Harris mentions one notable talent Jesse has. He has an amazing memory, she says. Years after he has worked on a project, he remembers the relevant code section, who did what, and what the wrinkles were. He's not a good person to try to buffalo. So pulling no punches, it's my great pleasure to introduce our mayor, Jesse Arreguín.
Well, thank you so much, Sandy, for that very warm and extensive introduction. And I want to thank the Berkeley City Club for inviting me to speak as part of your Arts and Culture series. And while we're not gathering in person due to the ongoing public health emergency, I'm glad to be able to join you virtually tonight. And it's really a pleasure to update all of you on the state of our city and to answer your questions, and look forward to your specific questions. Before I talk about the key issues facing Berkeley today, I want to first recognize and thank the Berkeley City Club leadership for your stewardship of this incredible historic City Club building. You know, it's a local treasure, and because of its rich history and exceptional architectural value, it's been designated as a City of Berkeley landmark on the national and also on the National Register of Historic Places. And every time I enter the building, I feel like I'm going back in time to a different era. And that's because of the work to really preserve its architectural features. And you know, when the City Club opened in 1930, our country was in the midst of a depression. And at that time, women were still denied access to jobs and other protections afforded to men. And as a result, women formed strong social networks. And so the Berkeley Women's City Club was created as a center for women's social, cultural, and recreational activities, and served 4,000 women members during its time. You know, the founders saw fit to hire renowned female architect Julia Morgan, a trailblazer in the architectural world, to design this beautiful building. And the City Club has continued on over the years as a hub for social, business, and cultural activities for the Berkeley East Bay community. So thank you for continuing the long tradition of the City Club as a center for arts and culture. And to me, the City Club represents the city's proud cultural history, which I believe we must preserve in the face of rapid change. You know, just as tumultuous as the times were when the City Club opened its doors in 1930, our city too has faced unprecedented challenges this past year, from COVID-19 to extreme fire threats, rising homelessness and housing insecurity, and the fragile state of our democracy. Yet despite all that we had been through this past year, and even in the darkest times, the light of our city shined bright. And I'm really proud to live in and represent this amazing city, a city that believes strongly in the values of compassion, equity, and social change. And those values were demonstrated over this past year as neighbors helped other neighbors, as our community supported our small businesses, arts organizations, and the homeless, as individuals organized drives to collect personal protective equipment so our nurses, doctors, and first responders can be safe. We came together in a profound way and looked out for each other, and the love and compassion and determination that we've shown helped get our city through it all, and is continuing to help get our city through it all. And I really believe will be the foundation that we build on for the future. I want to thank all of you for following our public health guidance, for wearing a mask, for practicing physical distancing, for getting vaccinated, and thinking about the health of your family, your friends, and your fellow neighbors. And because of our collective efforts as a city, we have been able to control the spread of COVID-19, but we know the highly contagious Delta variant poses a very real threat to our community, and we must continue to be vigilant. So I'd like to update you on our response to COVID-19 first and foremost. Over this past year, as the COVID-19 pandemic spread throughout our country, our city took early and decisive action to protect the health of our community. When the first COVID cases were identified in Alameda County, we joined public health officials throughout the region to issue the first shelter-in-place order in the country. We didn't make that decision lightly, knowing the disruptive impact it would have on our local economy. But we felt it was necessary to control the spread of an emerging threat. And early on, there was a lot that we did not know about COVID-19. And our response evolved based on emerging science, using data and preventative health measures. And thanks to the work of our public health staff and you, the people of Berkeley, I'm proud that we were able to prevent massive outbreaks and save thousands of lives. But we know that the impact of this pandemic has been felt in every part of our city, from our economy to our city budget and to our schools. And we know there's been a great deal of suffering and loss also. We have 53 reported deaths in Berkeley due to COVID-19. Countless others have become sick, and family members have become sick, and people have lost their jobs, and businesses have closed permanently. We can never get back what we've lost, and we know it's going to take years to build back our economy, but I'm committed, just as our president is, to making sure that we build back better as a community. The COVID-19 threat still exists, with the Delta variant posing a serious risk to all, especially the unvaccinated. And roughly 99% of all hospitalizations are of individuals who are not vaccinated, but we know that there are an increasing number of breakthrough cases. And so that's why wearing a face covering, the physical distancing measures, all are extremely important. I want to update you on our vaccination efforts. As many know, we opened a mass vaccination site at Golden Gate Fields earlier this year. We have since shut down that site. We were able to vaccinate tens of thousands of people at that location. And we have now transitioned to pop-up clinics in different parts of our city, working with our school district, working with nonprofit providers to increase access to vaccines throughout the city of Berkeley. Early on, it became very clear that there was a great disparity in who was getting vaccinated. And just like there's been a real disparity in terms of who's contracted and who's succumbed to COVID-19, those racial and economic disparities were very clearly present in terms of who was getting vaccinated. And so I've really made it a priority, working with our public health staff and community partners, to focus on outreach and vaccine access to hard to reach populations, including immigrants, the homeless, and our African-American and Latinx community. And we have partnered with churches and nonprofit organizations to host pop-up vaccine clinics and to also provide information about the safety and efficacy of vaccines. And we're going to continue to do this. Our current vaccination rate is over 80% if you account for UC-Berkeley. UC-Berkeley has a mandate that their students and staff must get vaccinated, and they're well over 90% on their way towards reaching that target. But we have more work to do. We know that vaccination is key to controlling this pandemic and to protecting all of us, particularly the unvaccinated. Just to provide some information, our case rates, currently we have 16.19 cases per 1,000 residents, and our test positivity rate is 0.88%. Happy to announce that literally just an hour ago, in response to the growing threat of the Delta variant, the city announced that it's taken important steps by instituting a mandate requiring proof of vaccination for certain types of businesses, including restaurants, bars, music venues, live performance venues, theaters, gyms, fitness establishments, and also a requirement that employees must show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test in those businesses. We're instituting this mandate because we think it's really critical to help slow the spread of the Delta variant, and also to ensure that when people are in indoor spaces for prolonged periods of time, that we can minimize the spread of COVID-19. In addition, the City Council on September 14th will be voting on a vaccine testing mandate for all of our city employees. We've learned that booster shots are now available for immunocompromised individuals, and wider availability of booster shots will be available after September 20th. So stay tuned about that information and get your booster shot. And lastly, the FDA trials for children under 12 years of age are ongoing. And there's the possibility of expanded vaccine availability by late fall for kids from 11 to 5 years old, which we very strongly support to help protect our kids, our teachers, and the staff in our schools. We face many challenges due to this pandemic, economic impacts on our city budget, but we've responded by taking steps to protect our businesses and residents from the economic impacts of COVID-19. We passed the COVID-19 Emergency Response Ordinance early on in the pandemic to institute a moratorium on evictions for commercial and residential tenants due to non-payment of rent. We launched the Berkeley Relief Fund and raised over $5 million. We provided grants to 700 small businesses, 63 arts organizations, and hundreds of families with expanded rental assistance. We know that the pandemic has also impacted the city's finances. Last year, we had a $40 million deficit that we had to close, but we were able to achieve a balanced budget. But we're still seeing declining parking, hotel, and sales tax revenues due to the pandemic, and we are anticipating a $20 to $35 million deficit this past year. But thanks to the president and Democratic majority in Congress and the American Rescue Plan, Berkeley is receiving $68 million over the next 2 years, of which $34 million will help us this year balance our budget deficit. And this past June, we did adopt a balanced budget, while also approving investments in expanded rental assistance for small businesses and arts organizations during this pandemic. This could not have happened without the leadership of the City Council, as well as our Emergency Operations Center, in which over 200 city staff have been deployed since late January 2020 on our pandemic response. And they've not only been working on our public health response, on communications, staffing, senior meal programs and childcare programs, and in addition, supporting our arts organizations, our small businesses, and our unsheltered population. We know that we have an increasing number of people in our city who do not have permanent housing. And so we felt it was really critical during this pandemic to increase sanitation, to provide safer shelter for people off the streets. So we acquired trailers and moved medically frail homeless individuals into trailers and provided wraparound services to those individuals. Working in partnership with Alameda County, we leased 2 hotel rooms, and we're still leasing 1 hotel room to provide shelter for individuals. And working with the county, we launched a street medicine team to do direct outreach and access to primary care for people experiencing homelessness. I do want to talk a little bit about housing and homelessness. I know this is an issue of great concern to many people in our community. It's still one of the greatest challenges that we face as a city, and even more acute due to the pandemic and the rising homelessness and housing insecurity that it's created. And my focus and the focus of the City Council has been to focus on what I call the 3 Ps: to produce new housing, to preserve existing affordable housing, and to prevent homelessness. In the area of production, we have prioritized first and foremost building affordable housing for the extremely low income, low and moderate income members of our community. And in doing so, we've streamlined rules around building affordable housing projects. Thanks to the generosity of the people of Berkeley in 2018, we passed Measure O, a $135 million general obligation bond for affordable housing. We've already funded over 400 units of permanently affordable housing through the Measure O bond, including a $50 million commitment towards affordable housing at the Ashby and North Berkeley BART stations as part of future development there. One project I'm particularly proud of is the Berkeley Way development on the city's Berkeley Way parking lot, which will provide 143 units of affordable housing and permanent supportive housing for the homeless, and an emergency homeless shelter on the ground floor with wraparound services, including a public health clinic. And this project is actually almost completed and will be opening in 2022. Another key part of our strategy around production has been to buy existing apartment buildings, including vacant buildings, and to rehab them and make them permanently affordable. And so we launched a small sites program that's been particularly focused on preservation of existing housing. Many people know that the city is exploring transit-oriented development at the North Berkeley and Ashby station, and this could create 1,500 new units of housing at these 2 locations. We are exploring amendments to our Southside plan to allow for denser housing close to campus to address the student housing shortage. Next year, we're going to launch a San Pablo Avenue planning process to develop an area plan for San Pablo. And lastly, we're launching an update to our city's housing element, which is mandated by state law, but also by the regional requirement to accommodate roughly 9,000 new units of housing as part of the state mandated regional housing needs allocation process. And we're going to kick off this process in the fall. And really central to this process is having extensive community engagement regarding how we're going to meet this significant requirement and regarding any zoning changes that may be necessary to achieve a compliant housing element. And lastly, around protection of existing renters. 2017, we made the largest investment in anti-displacement programs. We tripled our housing retention program, which provides emergency rental assistance to individuals who are facing eviction. We expanded legal services for tenants facing eviction, and we have very strong rental and eviction protections. You know, on the issue of homelessness, I really think that this is our collective responsibility. Citizens, government, the private sector, state and federal government. And this really is a moral crisis. We have close to 2,000 people who are homeless on an annual basis in the city of Berkeley. And we've certainly seen an increase of tenant encampments throughout our city and on our freeways. You know, during my administration, I made sure that we focus on the long-term goal of ending homelessness, and that we align our services around housing first. And the principle behind housing first is housing must be the ultimate solution to ending homelessness. We know that, you know, we don't have enough affordable housing to be able to house every single person who's experiencing homelessness. So we need to focus on interim solutions, such as expanding shelters and navigation centers, and expanding public health services, mental health services, job training programs, so that we can get people the resources that they need to be successful. You know, Berkeley spends over $17 million on homeless services. We've expanded shelter programs, including our STAIR Center, the East Bay's first navigation center. And this is all due to the generosity of the people of Berkeley and leveraging federal and outside resources. And I just want to call attention to Measure P, which was a tax that was passed in 2018, which provides around $6 to $8 million a year that we have invested towards expanding services to address homelessness in Berkeley. I want to address, I think, a very visible issue that many of us have seen and have had great concern about, which are the encampments along the freeway in the city of Berkeley. If any of you have driven past the University and Interstate 80 intersection, you'll notice that it is substantially different. And that is a result of many months of coordination with the governor's office, Caltrans, and the county, providing shelter for people and services to get them off the freeway and to clear that area and to make it safer. And we're going to be focusing on the Ashby off-ramp next. You know, I've received many concerns around the increase in encampments in Berkeley. And, you know, we are in the process of developing a formal encampment resolution policy looking at the city of Oakland's model. But our focus is to respond to concerns that are raised by community members, and to not only offer shelter for people before there's any sort of encampment resolution, but also work with people to reduce the impact that they may be having on our public realm. I do want to just call attention to some constraints that we are under federal law. Under the Martin versus Boise decision, any public agency is required to have to offer shelter or housing before they can remove an encampment. And so our neighborhood services, police and social service workers do extensive outreach and then post notice to remove an encampment. And right now we're doing extensive outreach throughout Berkeley and offering expanded shelter options for people. You know, our goal is to balance shelter and compassionate services with addressing the impacts on our streets, sidewalks, and of the unsheltered homelessness that we are seeing in our city. Just briefly on public safety, you know, we are seeing an increase in certain types of crimes, aggravated assault, homicides, auto theft, larceny. And while the overall crime rate has remained relatively flat, specific categories of property crimes have increased, such as vehicle thefts. We've also seen an increase in gun violence, particularly afflicting South and West Berkeley. And I'm very concerned about this increase in crime and believe very strongly that we need more resources to prevent and respond to crime and to respond smartly. And so the budget we just adopted this June includes over $1 million to create a new flexible crime prevention unit in the Berkeley Police Department to respond to crime trends and improve public safety, as well as expanded mental health crisis response. because we know part of what we're seeing is really a mental health crisis on our streets. We're looking at creating a violence prevention and intervention program modeled after Oakland's ceasefire. And lastly, we have launched a reimagining public safety process, which many of you have heard about. The goal is to create a new approach to policing in Berkeley, focused on community-oriented policing, reducing the burden of police time responding to mental health and social service calls, and having the right first responders respond to these calls. The goal is not to, quote, defund the police, but to reimagine and to reorient how we provide public safety services in Berkeley. And this also includes the social determinants that lead to crime and to interrupt the cycle of violence. I want to just briefly touch on the work we're doing around infrastructure and our future of our waterfront, which is something I'm particularly excited about. We have over $300 million in unfunded infrastructure needs, and this is the result of many years of deferred maintenance. Streets, sidewalks, our sewer system, our public buildings need major investment to prevent further degradation of our infrastructure. And I also think this presents an opportunity for us to plan for the future and to be visionary and to not only look at how we can improve our streets and public spaces and public buildings, but also how we can integrate new technology, how we can adapt to climate change as we're planning for the future of our infrastructure. And so several years ago, I launched a community initiative called Vision 2050. And the goal of Vision 2050 was to create a long-term roadmap for our capital needs in our city that's focused on leveraging new technologies and approaches, and also simultaneously addressing our broader threats of climate change. And so we are in the process of developing a long-term capital plan for the city right now. And we're looking at how to finance a major investment in infrastructure, particularly street repaving. We know we have a lot of work to do to significantly improve our streets. Another area, I want to talk about is the waterfront. I really think that it is a jewel of not just Berkeley, but our region, but it needs improvement. And so right now, the reconstruction of University Avenue is happening. And so hopefully soon, you will not need an all-terrain vehicle to be able to go to and from the waterfront. That's happening right now, thanks to the voters of Berkeley and Measure T1. We have launched a strategic planning process to create a new vision for our waterfront. Not only how we can expand recreational space, but also enhance commercial activity in a way that makes the waterfront a real anchor for not just our city, but for our region. And one thing I'm particularly excited about is the potential for a new ferry terminal and a municipal pier. And I'm a strong supporter of ferry service to expand transportation options, particularly emergency transportation in the event of an earthquake. And I think this could be an anchor to our waterfront and key to our city's revitalization efforts. I was asked to talk briefly about recent discussions around, quote, ending single-family zoning. And, regionally, we face a significant jobs housing imbalance. And as president of the Association of Bay Area Governments, our regional planning agency and council of governments for the 9-county Bay Area, I'm very aware of this and think we need a much more thoughtful regional comprehensive approach to how we address our housing crisis. One aspect of our work on the regional level is what's called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. This is a state mandated process that every 8 years, regional councils of government must distribute housing need to different cities and counties throughout the state of California. So this year, the state of California said that we need to plan for 441,000 new units in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so ABAG is working to distribute that housing need equitably throughout the region to address the jobs housing imbalance, to achieve greenhouse gas reduction, and to, quote, affirmatively further fair housing. This is a new mandate under state law, basically to address racial and economic segregation in our region. So every community will have to plan for significantly more housing. The RHNA requires that housing elements show that there's, quote, zone capacity to accommodate the required number of units in each jurisdiction. And RHNA does not require that you have to build the housing. But I do want to note that recent changes in state law, specifically Senate Bill 35, may result in staff level approval of certain projects if communities do not meet their RHNA targets. And we've also seen increasingly efforts on the state government to pass laws to put in place across the board statewide requirements around housing planning and to take away local discretion. One of the things we're also engaged in on the regional level is Plan Bay Area 2050. This is our regional growth plan, focusing on transportation, housing, economy, and the environment. And we will be giving final adoption to that plan in October. And one thing I'm particularly excited about is the new Bay Area Housing Finance Authority that we've launched, which is the first regional housing finance authority in the state of California, And we hope it's going to enable us to be able to generate significant revenues from the public and private sector to be able to fund affordable housing throughout the entire San Francisco Bay Area. Something that's gotten a lot of attention in recent news is the efforts in Berkeley to, quote, end exclusionary zoning. And many people do not know that single family zoning started in Berkeley in 1916 in the Elmwood district. And it was actually, it's been well established in the historic record. It was created to prevent a dance hall in the Elmwood district, which would have predominantly served African Americans. And so this is the foundation upon which our zoning is built upon. Right, initially intended to racially segregate people from one particular neighborhood. We know that redlining further exacerbated racial disparities in who could access housing and live in different parts of our city. And so I think that we must break down barriers to housing. We must address systemic racism at all levels, including in our housing policies. We must allow people to live in all neighborhoods. And so part of what the Berkeley City Council is advancing is the discussion around how to allow incremental density, projects up to 4 units in certain residential neighborhoods, with a real focus on design to make sure that these projects fit into the character of our neighborhoods. We're not talking about having huge skyscrapers. And so the implementation of this resolution to end exclusionary zoning is being folded into the housing element update that I talked about earlier, that is actually going to launch this fall. And we really welcome all of your participation in that important process. Lastly, I was asked to talk about the recent agreement that we were able to reach with UC-Berkeley. And I'll just say, as an alumnus of UC-Berkeley, I think the university adds a lot to not just our city, but to our region. But we also need to make sure the university is a good neighbor. And that's something that I've particularly been fighting on ever since I took office. And we entered into an agreement on July 27th, settling 2 lawsuits on the Upper Hearst project, which is a academic and housing project up on Hearst Avenue for the Goldman School of Public Policy, as well as a lawsuit on an intercollegiate volleyball court project at the Clark campus. And this agreement also covers the recently approved 2021 campus long-range development plan. The settlement results in increased annual payments to mitigate UC's impact on city services. It creates a framework for collaborative planning for future campus projects, and also on issues of mutual interest, such as the closure of all debates, which is something we're fighting very hard on to keep our only emergency room acute care hospital open. The settlement agreement results in the largest amount that any UC campus has ever provided to a host community, $83 million over the 16-year term, starting with $4.1 million. In fact, we actually got the check last week from the university, escalating by 3% a year. 30% of the annual payment from the campus will be spent directly on services and projects benefiting the residents that live within a half a mile of the UC campus and Clark campus. So focusing on the area, the campus area. For background, it's important to acknowledge that under the California state constitution, the University of California is exempt from local land use laws and most local taxes. And additionally, decisions regarding increased enrollment and growth are made by the state legislature or the Board of Regents, not the city councils of the communities that they're in. So this puts our host communities at a disadvantage over challenging or regulating the university's expansion. And the only option that cities like Berkeley have are either to negotiate with the university in good faith or to sue. And in this case, the city of Berkeley did both. After learning that UC was expanding enrollment by 11,000 additional students beyond what they had planned 15 years ago, the city sued the university over failing to adequately study and mitigate the significant increase. And for over 2 years, we fought valiantly in court, while also keeping the door open to UC officials to reach a negotiated settlement. And while we did recently win on a ruling on environmental review, the judge's decision did not mandate increased annual payments for the impacts of additional enrollment. All the while, the university stopped making its annual payments to the city under the prior 2005 agreement because that agreement had expired. So we weren't getting anything for the university. When I came into the mayor's office in 2016, I set out to improve the relationship between the city and the campus and negotiate a much better deal than my predecessor, Tom Bates, had negotiated. And I feel we've accomplished this. And this new agreement immediately doubles the annual payments to the city and includes real commitments for stronger collaboration on projects that impact our neighborhoods. And certainly I know that it's engendered a great deal of controversy, but at the end of the day, I think what's in the long-term best interests of Berkeley is trying to create a new environment in which the city and the campus can work and coexist. and also to make sure that we're getting, we're getting close to what we should be getting to mitigate the impacts of increased growth and enrollment on our city. And I think this is a big step forward. The campus had no obligation to have to negotiate a settlement with us, but through hard fought negotiations and litigation, we've arrived at this point, and I think it's going to enable the city to work more collaboratively with the university over its growth in the coming years. So I believe you also, Sandy, wanted me to talk about the project that has been proposed for the City Club lot. And, I think it makes sense to develop the parking lot, which would be a win-win solution for providing much needed housing, while also providing funds to support the repairs of the City Club. But I do believe very strongly that any project on the parking lot must be contextual to the historic City Club and not overwhelm the City Club, obstruct light and air. It needs to be very sensitively designed. So look forward to, hearing more about that. And with that, I want to open it up for questions, and thank you so much.
Hi, so thank you so much for that quick tour. That was like
A lot to cover.
that was like speed dating. It was great though. So if you can see the chat, we have quite a few questions coming in. I don't know whether you want me to read them or you can see them and kind of include the question in your answer.
Sure, I can just take them one by one. So this first question from Terry is, in the negotiations with UC, can the public park on weekends before and after on the fire trail above Lawrence Hall? It seems fair that we have access. Absolutely. That wasn't explicitly a condition of the settlement, but that's something that we can further, we can follow up with the university about. And I do agree that we should have expanded public access to the university's parking. Please explain the new ordinance concerning recreational vehicles and where they can be parked. So in 2019, the City Council passed an ordinance to prohibit overnight parking of oversized vehicles, including recreational vehicles. And this really was in response to concerns that we had heard from particularly businesses and residents in West Berkeley, where whole blocks were being taken over by vehicles, and people were dumping waste into the storm drains, and there were a whole host of impacts that we're still dealing with. Frankly, we're still trying to manage. So council passed this law, but we did not. We gave direction not to implement it until we can open a safe parking site that we can move some of these vehicles to off the streets to mitigate some of the impacts. And so I'm happy to say that this month we're going to be opening that safe parking site at a lot in West Berkeley, which can accommodate up to 50 vehicles. We're going to provide sanitation, security, and while we're working to either connect people to permanent housing or to provide them the resources for them to be able to move to another location. So I think that that's really key, and that will also enable us to begin enforcement of some of our parking regulations. We're going to be posting signage in the 8th and Harrison area to restrict parking to 4-hour periods, and that it will also have the effect of not allowing long-term parking. The sad reality is that because of the broader housing crisis that we face as a region, we're seeing more and more people who are sheltering in vehicles. And while I think we have to minimize the impacts on our businesses and residents, we also have to be thoughtful and compassionate about how we address their needs as well. In the past couple of years, there's been greater attention in making our streets safer for bicyclists, et cetera. I recently read the city will no longer enforce the vehicle traffic rule for infractions of bicyclists. Please explain how this will enhance public safety. There was a proposal that was introduced to implement what were called sort of Idaho stops, where you don't have to fully stop at an intersection, but that has not been operationalized or adopted formally by the City Council. It was sent to our Transportation Commission for further review, and also our City Attorney's Office around sort of legal issues. So that's not a policy yet in the City of Berkeley. And in fact, our police are, when they do see people, and I know some of our city staff have been ticketed going through intersections, that they are doing enforcement. And in fact, they've received a grant from the state of California for enforcement of not just the drunk driving laws, but also some of the regulations around bicyclists speeding through intersections. I ultimately think that what we need to focus on is education to bicyclists around the fact that these laws exist. And yeah, while there need to be penalties, We also need to make it clear that the city is going to enforce and the rules that bicyclists have to operate under, because I do agree it's important for the safety of pedestrians as well. What is the status with fixing our streets? I understand we don't have enough resources to repair all the problematic streets. Yes, we do absolutely do not have enough resources. I think it's the amount that's needed to fully fix all of our streets and to reach it's called a pavement condition index of 75, which is really the baseline, is over $200 million just to make that investment. And this is many years of impacts that have not been addressed. So I think we should do several things. One, we need to make a big investment in our infrastructure, and also we need to look at the university paying for some of the impacts they create on our streets, as well as private developers. A lot of heavy construction vehicles do a lot of wear and tear on our streets, and we need to assess fees so that they're paying their fair share and it's not being externalized just on our taxpayers. I think if we're going to make a significant impact, we got to have a big infusion of resources. And I think the infrastructure package that President Biden has introduced and is working its way through the House, I think could provide a real opportunity for us to leverage our investment, double or triple our investment, to be able to fix things like our streets, our sidewalks, and our infrastructure. Karen Chapman has asked, it's great the population university is no longer there. However, not welcoming at all or healthy to see huge piles of trash in our freeway ramps, including the Ohlone Greenway. Can stuff like this be cleaned on a more regular basis daily? Absolutely. I'm very concerned about just the maintenance of our public right of way. And our city is actually moving forward and enforcing some of our regulations around the accumulations of objects on sidewalks to make sure that our sidewalks and public spaces are accessible, but also to do significant cleaning. And I'm telling you, we pick up tons and tons of debris. And part of it is people, who are accumulating stuff. And part of it is an illegal dumping issue, frankly, where, people are just dumping stuff at freeway interchanges and in other areas. And so, while we are, working to significantly clean up, some of these public spaces, I think we need to look at increasing fines for illegal dumping, looking at putting in cameras in some of the hot spots and posting signage so people know that, if you're going to dump stuff here, we're going to get you on film and we're going to send you a ticket. I just think we really need to significantly, increase our enforcement around this issue, because people think that they can get away with it, and it's not acceptable for people to trash our public spaces. How many rental units have been made available and what percentage is affordable? Well, we have, oh boy, I think we have about 1,500 units that are currently in the development pipeline. We have a requirement in Berkeley that 20% of the total project be affordable to low and low income households. And so while we're getting some affordable housing through those developments, I think where we're getting the most affordable housing is through things like buying existing buildings and keeping them permanently affordable, and converting them to things like limited equity cooperatives, so the residents can actually own the building and has some stake in its long-term management and governance, promoting resident control, and things like building permanently affordable housing. We have over 400 units of affordable housing under construction throughout our city, along San Pablo Avenue, in the downtown, South Berkeley. And some of these projects are under construction now. Some will be breaking ground very soon. So you'll be seeing those projects underway. We know that there's a long, long way to go to address the huge affordability crisis that we're facing as a region. And Berkeley is a city of 120,000 residents. We have a budget of roughly $600 million. We can't do it alone. And we really need the state and federal government to step up its investment in public housing and affordable housing. And the money that we spend in building affordable housing, we're able to leverage 4 to 1 with private sources and federal and state grants to be able to build an affordable project. But we also need to look at things that making housing, the cost and time of building housing much less expensive and time consuming. Because the longer it takes to build an affordable housing project and the more expensive it is to build, the less likely it's going to happen. So I'm interested in looking at things like modular housing, prefabricated housing, as a way to expand the number of units, looking at how we can repurpose parking lots and public spaces to expand housing. And I really think public land needs to be prioritized for public good. and should be prioritized first and foremost for affordable housing. There was a question from Karen Chapman around the Go Bike installations and why they're not installed on more corridors like Solano Avenue. 100% agree with you. I think the intent was always to start in very high density areas where there's a lot and close to transit hubs and expand to other areas. And so we are looking at, expanding to Solano and other parts of Berkeley that don't have those resources. We're also looking at creating a electric mobility pilot, so that things like electric bikes can be available for people to rent for those first and last mile options. And as an owner of an electric bike myself, I'll say that it has significantly expanded my range and ability to do things. And I think could really ensure that multi-generational opportunities for people to get on bikes, to reduce their carbon footprint, and to be able to to get to and from work and home and to from our BART stations. And transportation emissions account for 60% of our greenhouse gases in Berkeley, and that's just on par with many cities throughout the country. So if we're actually going to significantly reduce our climate impact in Berkeley, we have to reduce the carbon emissions from transportation trips. And so part of that is really making transit more robust and accessible. Part of that is making our streets more safer for bicyclists and pedestrians. And part of that is looking at electric mobility, not just electric vehicles, and expanding electric vehicle infrastructure, but also to look at other forms of electric micro mobility. Karen Libby asks, what is the average cost per unit and what is the number occupancy versus total units available? Well, the average cost per unit varies on the type of project. I will say for affordable housing projects, it's on average between $400,000 to $1 million. It's a significant cost per unit. And that's once again why I think we need to look at alternative methods of building housing and reducing the time and expense for building affordable housing, because that's going to drive up the cost. There's no question about that. With respect to occupancy, we don't have really good vacancy data, but there clearly is greater vacancies now than there were before because of the COVID pandemic, although that's changing with a lot of students coming back to campus. Some of our buildings, our new buildings, have a high vacancy rate, some don't. And I think a lot of that depends on location, depends on the cost of the housing. So while we don't have concrete vacancy data, we do know that market conditions now are very different than they have been historically due to the pandemic. Karen, thank you, Karen, for your comment. Yeah, I would love to follow up on this housing producer. We need to look at alternative ways of building housing. Sandy's asking about height limits downtown. And, in 2010, Berkeley voters passed Measure R, which allowed a certain limited number of buildings above 75 feet in the downtown. And so I just will say for the record, I didn't support that measure. I was the representative of the downtown at the time. I felt that it was a significant giveaway to private developers without mandating that they provide community benefits in return. And sure enough, when the first project came down the line, 2211 Herald Way, the developer got a significant height increase and the city did not get concrete community benefits. That project actually is not going to happen. The developer decided not to proceed with it. So, right now there are 5 what are called tall buildings that are allowed in the downtown. 2 buildings at up to 180 feet, which is roughly 18 stories. 3 buildings at 180 feet, rather, 18 stories, and 2 buildings at 120 feet. There is one project underway right now, the hotel at Center and Shattuck, many of you have seen. That is nearing completion. It should be opening in October. That's the first kind of taller building that's been built in the downtown. There are several others that have been proposed. And I do think while we desperately need housing, we need to make sure that these projects are contextual, that we have good design, that they're minimizing impacts, and we're getting significant community benefits back to our community. There was a question around the vaccine passport program and when that's going to take effect. And so, and you'll be definitely reading about this, I'm sure, in due time. So the new health order that was released today will be effective on September 3rd. Although there's a grace period for implementation, full implementation will start September 10th. And this will require that employees of certain businesses must be vaccinated, while also requiring that the indoor portion of those businesses, that you have to verify proof of vaccination for patrons who are at least 12 years old or older. And this is in addition to requirements to wear face coverings, practice physical distancing. As of September 10th, sites will have to require patron vaccination verification. And these include the indoor areas of places serving food or drinks, such as restaurants, bars, clubs, theaters, and entertainment venues. Places where patrons do fitness, cardiovascular, large indoor events of 1,000 people or more. They'll be required to have to check vaccination cards, digital records, as proof of vaccination. And I just have to say, this is something I've been fighting for many weeks to push for. I'm deeply, deeply concerned about the Delta variant and the increased case rates that we're seeing in the breakthrough cases. Although, people that are vaccinated have very, very minimal risk of being hospitalized or facing serious illness. But in order for us to control this pandemic, we need to do some things that are outside the box. And I think we need to make it a condition patronizing these businesses that you have to get vaccinated. Unfortunately, despite a huge amount of vaccine available and all of our best efforts to make vaccine available, we need to change behavior. And we believe this is part of that. And we also think that this is going to make it safer for all of us vaccinated people that want to go to those businesses. Because right now we don't know whether people are vaccinated or not. So order was released today. It technically starts September 3rd, full implementation September 10th. Okay, Richard, what do you say to those who say that we don't need to build more housing, that we need to use the current housing stock more effectively and equitably? I say that we need to do both. There's no question. We have vacant buildings right now. It's completely vacant buildings that should be put back on the market and repurposed. For a variety of reasons, they're not. And I think we need to look at things like a vacancy tax, a provide incentive for absentee landlords and people that are keeping whole buildings vacant to put that housing on the market so we can address our housing needs. But also, I think we do need to build more housing. There's no question about it. We have a significant shortage in our city and in our region, in our state. It's a question of where we build and how we build. And that needs to be done in a way that involves the whole community and not a top-down approach from Sacramento or from City Hall. But there is a reality that, the fact that we see such increasing rates of homelessness and, kids that grew up in Berkeley can't afford to live here, and teachers and working professionals who can't afford to live here is a symptom of the significant shortage of housing. There's no question about that. And we are not gonna, I have to say, I don't think we're gonna be able to build our way out of it now, but we do need to make progress to make sure that we can address this significant shortage, and so that we're not in this continual emergency state. And I do believe that building more housing at all income levels does reduce displacement pressure also, because more higher income, higher wage individuals will be renting that new housing and not taking up older housing and displacing existing renters or people that have long-standing ties to our community. So I think we need to do both. And I think we need to be thoughtful about how we do it. So question around employee pensions fully funded, how big a percentage of the budget is this? No, and our employee pensions are not fully funded. The unfunded employee benefit liabilities by roughly $500 million. Nor do I think that there is an expectation that it all needs to be fully funded now, but we need to have a plan for how we are going to pay for it. And so the city council has taken several steps over the past few years to address the city's long-term fiscal health. Most notably, before I became mayor, the city didn't even have a reserve. So, in the event of a pandemic or a fire or an earthquake, and businesses were closed, we weren't getting tax revenue, we didn't have any guaranteed revenue source to be able to sustain city operations. And so we established a reserve. We've established a goal of 30% of our general fund to meet our reserve. And if it wasn't for that reserve, we would not have been able to balance our budget last year during the pandemic when we saw a $40 million deficit. And we are replenishing that reserve every year and adding to it and building to it, so that we're even in a stronger position in the event of other emergencies or natural disasters, which we're going to experience, unfortunately. But also, we are actually putting money into a fund and prepaying some of our pension obligations, which is helping us reduce that unfunded liability. And we're going to be doing that on an annual basis. Another element of this is our collective bargaining agreements and making sure that we have cost sharing that's fair for cities and workers. This is, frankly, we're dealing with decades of issues, and it's going to take time to address, but we need to have a plan, and we need to be able to start saving money to be able to address what we know is going to be a significant issue down the road. Okay, the question around access to BART, the proposed ideas to develop housing on BART are downright dismissive for people who need to park. Will you engage to balance the housing and parking needs? Absolutely. I think the reality is that the North Berkeley BART station, not as much the Ashby station, but North Berkeley particularly, is partially a commuter station. People from the hills and from other parts of Berkeley do drive there and park there, and we need to have some amount of replacement parking. There's no question about that. We also need to expand transit service in parts of our city that are currently not well served to get people to and from, and have regular service to and from our BART stations. And so right now, BART in the city of Berkeley are engaged in a planning process. I think it's the El Cerrito Berkeley corridor transportation study. I can't remember the acronym. And the idea is to look at the whole corridor from El Cerrito to Berkeley and how we're going to meet the transportation needs of that whole area. Because at El Cerrito Station, at North Berkeley Station, and Ashby Station, the BART is looking at building housing at all those three stations. And so we need to look comprehensively at the access and transportation needs of all those different areas. But we have to recognize that not everyone's going to be able to walk or bike to BART. And we need to have transportation access that is multi-generational and that accounts for the needs of all people. And I'm very, very committed to ensuring that. So I think I just powered through all the questions.
You did. I mean, that was just awesome. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate your time. And I see that memory chip of yours firing on all cylinders. We greatly appreciate your joining us tonight and answering all these questions. And those of you who have questions who didn't get a chance to ask, I'm sure that Jesse's accessible. He has a website, he has a newsletter, lots of resources and ways to get in touch with him. So I encourage you to keep the dialogue going. And we hope to see you again maybe next year. I do want to say that next month we have a wonderful speaker. We have Erwin Chemerinsky, the Dean of Berkeley Law. Well, once again, he's like our pocket legal scholar. He's so generous with his time. And he will be back with us in October to preview the next session of the Supreme Court.
And talk about his new book.
And he has a brand new book on the legacy of how the police, how the Supreme Court has enabled the police to shred our civil rights.
It's called Presumed Guilty.
Yeah.
So if only we had 9 Erwin Chemerinskys on the U.S. Supreme Court, we would still have, we would have defeated that horrible, Texas abortion bill. This is such a fragile time in our democracy. And I didn't talk about that in our democracy and in our whole legal system. And it's going to take all of us really working to protect voting rights and voting access and to push back on this very conservative overreach that's even happening here in California. And I'll just say, we have a recall election. I encourage everyone to turn in your ballot. It's extremely important that everyone vote. And I hope that this has given a new focus on the need to reform our recall procedures long-term. But I'll just say on a personal level, I worked for Governor Newsom, when he was on the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco 20 years ago. I know him personally. He's a very, very thoughtful, visionary leader. And just the destabilizing impact of this at this time, where we have fires and we have a pandemic, is hugely concerning. I also didn't talk about fire risk, which is, I think, in all of our minds, seeing the catastrophic fires that are happening up north. And thanks to the brave efforts of our firefighters, we actually were able to protect Echo Lake Camp. And so Echo Lake Camp is going to be here to stay, thanks to the just tremendous work of our fire crews up there to try to suppress some of the fires. But we know, the 91 Hills fire was not too long ago. And we know that we face extreme risk. And so this is on my mind constantly. Every single time we have a red flag day or there's very fierce winds. And the city is significantly expanding its efforts on vegetation management, on education, on fire prevention. And this is going to be a real area of focus because our whole city is at risk, not just the hills. But you remember the 23 fire went as far as Shattuck Avenue. And we know that with the threat of climate change, we're just facing increased risks, whether it's sea level rise, whether it's fires, whether it's other climate emergencies. And so we just have to continue to double down on our work to fight climate change and mitigate its impacts, but also to prepare our community for the impacts that we're already experiencing right now. So I didn't talk about that, but I wanted to just briefly touch on it.
You got it in there. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight. And thank you everybody who tuned in. I hope you'll share what you learned with your friends and family and neighbors. And hopefully we'll see you again next year, Mayor. Thank you. Good night.